So I'm going to welcome everybody here and introduce myself. My name is John Porter, and I'm the President and CEO of the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. The Wellness Council of Maine is a program of the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. And I see that we have three directors of the Wellness Council of Maine here. We've got 2 formers and 1 current, all of whom have had the hazing ritual of having to work for me. One of the things that Roxanne and I talk a lot about when we talk about the program and our vision for it and where it needs to go is that we've become really expert at preaching to the choir. And, we're really good. We got we got members, and they're committed, and they lean in, and they understand the message. And as I look out in this group today, I see a lot of familiar faces that I know are in the choir. So I think all our panelists were told that we would start with an opening question, which was, does wellness really save money, or is it just a feel-good proposition? But I think that I'll have them introduce themselves in a moment. But I think really what we need to focus on as a group today is how, as a group, and how, as people in organizations who are committed to wellness, how do we frame it to the higher ups, especially, but to the people down below as something valuable. And I really think that that's really the piece of information we all want to walk away with. What's that great messaging that we can go? Because everybody in this room understands the value and understands the statistics and understands how and most of you know how to do it and do it really well. So I'm going to start by asking our panel to just introduce themselves once more if you've spoken earlier today, or for the first time if you haven't. But we'll just start right on the right here.
Wayne, you heard a lot from me already. So.
I'm Larry Catlett with Occupational Medical Consulting.
I'm Justin Allen with Employee Health Solutions.
Oh, I was going to give more information than that.
Go ahead.
I'm Jamie Laliberty with Eastern Maine Healthcare Systems, and I manage wellness and welfare benefits for the system.
And I'm Susan Char with Concentra Urgent Care. We're a national occupational health provider, and I manage the Bangor, Augusta, and Lewiston facilities here in Maine.
So let's, and I do want to keep this just informal as a conversation, but let's start a little bit with the value proposition and the question that I put out front. When someone comes up to you and says, isn't this just a feel-good exercise, and does it really save any money? What's your elevator pitch? What do you tell them in 30 seconds to dispel that notion? Go ahead, jump. Susan,
I got that one.
Okay. Well,
if trends can continue as are predicted, there's going to be a shortage of providers and facilities, and people aren't going to be able to get the services they need. So the way that we look at it is that if you want to be remaining competitive and in business in the future, you really need to do something about it now, because it's only going to get worse if you don't.
another elevator. Give me another elevator. 30 seconds on why it's worthwhile and it's not just a feel-good exercise. Anybody?
Basically, I mean, if you're an employer, you want employees with longevity that know how to do their job and do it well. And if you have people aging, you want them to age as well as possible so that they're able to do their job at a high level. And we live in a culture where if you don't do anything, if you just kind of go with the status quo, you're going to age very unhealthily and become very ineffective more quickly. So you want to create basically a culture and give employees tools that they can use to keep themselves healthier for longer.
Other thoughts?
I would say what I always say to people, and I am a big believer in wellness, but I always frame it as wellness is a very important prong of a multifaceted population health management strategy that includes much more than just wellness.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be kind of a naysayer about that. I don't think there's an elevator speech that works very well unless you already know who you're talking to.
Right.
And that's a very difficult thing, because when we talk about savings and we talk about what we're doing, generally people are expecting that to come off the bottom line of whatever they're talking about. And the point of fact, if you're talking about a fairly limited wellness intervention, that's one thing. If you're talking about a total population health management, much like we heard today, where the savings comes from may be very different places, because wellness doesn't have any control over what's gonna be charged for something next week. And we don't have that kind of ability, and so if you're looking at bottom line things rather than trend slowing, it's different. So I really think it depends, and one of the things that I find the hardest to do is what is exactly you wanna know about wellness. If I'm pitching it to a person, it's much easier, because what I do with people is look for what's important to them about whatever the change that may or may not be needed to be made is. And that's the easy part, I think, with an individual. To a CEO, it's a little bit different.
So what's the CEO pitch? Let's start there. If you're sitting in front of a CEO, they don't have a particularly robust wellness program, and you're either doing something on behalf of the Wellness Council of Maine, or you're doing something in your consulting practice, or you're trying to offer services to them, what's the pitch to somebody who's running an organization?
Assuming that they do, one of the things that people say is that, well, we really aren't worried about cost, we're really not worried about savings, we're worried about our people. I always find that a little bit difficult to buy, because usually what it comes down to in the end is that it costs too much. So it's basically, I think, to show people that, to demonstrate the axiom that I think is very well known and was demonstrated here today, that if you use the right program with the right identification tools, which is basically what D. Eddington did when he started out, to look at what costs money, what people spend money on. If you identify those behaviors, that if you change those behaviors, and you can document that you change those behaviors. In other words, high risk is no longer 37%, it's 2%, and the low risk is no longer 15%, it's 70%. Then you can extrapolate that by going to spend and finding out what the group would have spent had they not changed versus what the group has spent before, and you can definitely show effects on spend. Within the participating members of the group. And I think that's just a given to me. You can do that. The problem is when you start trying to look at ROI based on the program in its entirety, what is the description of that program? What is it that you're really talking about that has really made the bulk of the changes? Where is it that you're trying to save money? There's no question you can show the spend is different, substantially different. Substantially different, 9 million over 7 years for a particular company. But basically, I think that when you then try to extrapolate that to ROI, there's a million problems with that, which we can talk about later. Mostly is we don't have a model that takes into account what makes wellness work, which is soft stuff like management support throughout the ranks, all that sort of thing. So it's very difficult to assess the ROI, but you can certainly show effect on spend. And that spend, it's interesting what you find is the group in the spend spends less than half. If it's an 80% group, they'll spend less than half of the money on the rest of it is spent by people not in the group that aren't participating. So it's not, and that's with direct dollars from the spend of the people, not extrapolated stuff. I think it's very important. I think if you look at the best ROI studies, they tend to use what people actually spend, claims dollars, not extrapolated claims dollars. Well, this might have turned into this might have turned into that. You go and you see what you spend, what you not spend. You never get credit for the stuff that you don't, that doesn't happen. That's the problem. So you can look at what people spend and show that what they spend decreases, and you can show some real change.
So other thoughts about how you pitch to somebody at the top of an organization? Right?
Well, there's a gentleman, I can't remember his name, who got tired of being asked that question, so he went out and did some research, and he created this book called Proof Positive. And it was a book about, I don't know if it's still in print, but it was about that thick. And it was just abstracts of every published research study on worksite wellness programs. And you just went through abstract after abstract after abstract showing there was return on investment. So the data is there. I mean, this guy put it all together in a book. So there's no lack of data. If people could be convinced with data, we would have won, I think. It's something else, it's like I say, that belief system that.
John, the book that Wayne's referring to is Proof Positive by Larry Chapman.
There you go, that's it, thank you very much.
The problem with that is that I just, for instance, read an editorial by Michael O'Donnell today about a study done on ROI, and it's just, you can't believe any of the stuff that's in the Proof Positive book. That's the problem. Or you could play Al Lewis.
Don't get me wrong, Dr. Cal, I'm not speaking in favor of the book.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
I'm just adding information. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of issues when it comes to savings and being able to demonstrate that we're making a difference. There are a lot of issues. In fact, Michael O'Donnell, in one of his editorials a year ago, this past fall, said most programs aren't making a difference. So I think you have to understand, it's not an easy subject, it's not easy to understand, and I don't know that it's even conducive to an elevator pitch. Even amongst us in the business, there's pardon the expression, but there's a hell of a lot of confusion. So I think we have to be careful.
I find that when we get caught up in talking about return on investment, there's just, I mean, if you're a CEO or a CFO, you're probably naturally skeptical of, facts and figures. If people come and say, I'm gonna save you X amount of dollars, I'd say your first inclination is to not believe that and try to get further proof. And, there are so many different ways to calculate ROI and so many different theories about it. I find that it really, being in Maine, I think we have a pretty strong community feeling, and our businesses are they tend to be more, I would say, family, almost like an extended family, rather than, some huge corporation that's in, somewhere else. And people genuinely care about the people that they work with, and who work for them. And so, when we start with a company and do a health screening for the first time, almost without fail, we find at least one person who has blood pressure that's so dangerously high that they end up having to go from the screening to the hospital or straight to their doctor. That person could, tip over at any minute. And when you start talking about it in those terms, that it's people, it's the people that you work with, and you're able to maybe save one of their lives, or at least, decrease the risk of them dying tomorrow, that tends to be pretty powerful. And so I find that, to an extent that, it's more like that's the value on the investment rather than the return on the investment. And I think that's a better way generally to talk about it, so we don't get caught up in the weeds of, well, I read the 1%, well, I read 1.6%, or, $1.01 versus $2 for every dollar you invest. And I think, that's ultimately what we're about anyways. Most people in this room aren't probably here because of the, 17 cents that you might save. We're here because we want our fellow people to be well and recognize them as people. And so I think that talking about it in those terms can be really helpful, again, though, depending on who you're talking to.
And I'd like to build on that because I agree with Justin. Of course, my CEO is the CEO of a large hospital system, but for us, it's because it's the right thing to do. By taking care of our employees, we can better take care of our patients and our communities. And I think, although if I was selling a wellness service, I wouldn't say it's the right thing to do. I think you can frame that in taking care of our people is a very valuable investment in the future of our company.
Go ahead, Sue.
I'll just piggyback even some more. We had given a presentation on the aging workforce recently, and one of the slides really resonated with me. We all have so many seconds, minutes, hours, days that we're going to be living here on this earth. And the slide depicted that we, as human beings, spend 75% of our lifetime deteriorating. So unless Jackson Labs comes up with that mysterious fountain view, in my lifetime, hopefully, we're all going to die. So the question becomes, how are we going to deteriorate successfully where we not only avoid health issues and therefore health care costs, but that we're also very productive members of society and happy both professionally and personally. That's the bottom line.
So let me put kind of a real world or a real world conundrum on this, because Roxanne and I have spent a lot of time in the last year talking about the fact that a lot of our members come from companies that are rated for their experience with their employees. But there's most companies in Maine, and I think over half the employees in Maine work for companies where their insurance is not rated. And we've talked, and I think there was there's been some conversation with the legislature, and some of you have been involved in it, in trying to get some incentives in community rating formulas for wellness programming. But nonetheless, when you pull that piece off the table, you know, it seems to me that it becomes a much harder conversation with that very busy business owner, or if it's a medium-sized company, that very busy HR director, you know, or usually if it's a company with 40 employees, they're gonna be marketing, HR, and maybe a third function, right? So, build on that, you know, the idea that you can get employers to buy in, not even without the economic incentive.
Because everything is integrated. I know as our organization, we treat workplace injuries. So when we're dealing with a company that has a comprehensive, sustainable wellness program, we see less workplace injuries. When we do see an injury from that company, that employee, because they're healthier, they typically will recover quicker. They're more engaged, and they hold themselves accountable for participating in their treatment plan. So when all is said and done, they're saving the medical claims, but also the losses in productivity. The medical costs are actually just such a small portion of the opportunity that a company has to realize benefits for. And I think that because most of the people here have been in this a while, it is so much more than just nutrition and exercise and smoking cessation. Yeah, that's what we all first got into, but it really encompasses a whole mindset, a whole way of life. You know, we have the mental health issues. They're huge. Sleep deprivation. It affects performance, accidents, mood, attitude, absenteeism, presenteeism. I'm reading a list. Learning and training, which I was like, wow, yeah, it does, I guess. Health and healthcare utilization. We've got oral health. Who talks about oral health nowadays? And financial wellness. 95% of the population loses sleep because they're worried about, oh, geez, how am I going to pay for this or cover that? We need to really look at all of this stuff, because the bottom line is all of these issues are impacting the performance at work. They're affecting the absenteeism, the presenteeism, the turnover. The turnover costs are huge. We really need to make sure that we're taking care of the employees and they're staying put. And the philosophy, hopefully someday, is going to be from cradle to grave. The obstetrician should be reiterating this stuff with the pregnant mother, the nursery schools, the elementary, college. Then when the employee graduates and moves on and gets a job, the employer should be reiterating these things. They're all intertwined, and until a company recognizes that and addresses everything, I'm not saying don't stop what you're doing, that's great, but you need to keep building upon it, because wellness affects so many areas.
Wayne, Larry, I heard you, because you're the data guys, or you're more, you know, I kind of heard a sense that when we get away from that dollars and cents ROI, that there still remains some discussion to be had about how we quantify that. And maybe I just want to pull that string a little bit with you and just sort of, you know, get your sense of what we're missing in terms of either the methodology or the data sets that would help us to make that soft case as you described it.
Well, if you've got somebody who's interested in productivity, and I will say that everybody's not, but if you have people who realize the importance of productivity, there is no question that productivity is much more greatly effective than kind of, it's 3 to 1 at least. Some people think it's a lot more than that. But basically, I think if you can talk to them about that productivity, you can actually demonstrate. There are studies that have shown that if you apply, if you change it in 8 certain risks that are all weighted in a certain way, you will substantially impact productivity. So you can show people that you can do that, and Eddington has shown clearly that everything else, like workers' comp, short-term disability, the entire stuff, is all related to that productivity axiom. Fine, great, you get your medical costs down, but when 75% of your problem is productivity, that's really what you should be chasing anyway. That's a hard sell to many people because they don't know how to measure it. But if they are interested in that, and they are interested in work comp or short-term disability or something else, you have an entree to talk to them through that.
Yeah, I would say that the people that the CEO will believe is another CEO Okay, not us, okay. So, I don't know if you know who Joe Edwards, and know Joe Edwards used to be insurance commissioner. And he then, not just insurance commissioner, he started all these self-insured workers' comp coalitions. And we happen to be a member of one of them. It's called the Greater Portland Five. And so in order to be a member of this workers' comp group, a self-insured group, you have to agree with the other CEOs that are companies that are a member of that to engage in extensive and appropriate risk management and safety. And they have, when you sit down at the table with the other members of your workers' comp group, CEO to CEO, you're accountable to those other CEOs on your safety program and your spend for workers' comp, because you're pulling down the whole group. So peer-to-peer, it's hugely successful. There's hundreds of companies that Joe has in these groups that are successful because it's peer-to-peer, CEO to CEO that sit down together and say, we're accountable to each other to have safety, and we all have safety together. We're all going to save a bundle of money. And the lab saves a bundle of money because we're members of that coalition. Joe started a healthcare concept just like the workers' comp concept. It's been in effect for a couple of years now. And so in these workers' comp coalitions, they're soliciting each other to be members of the same health plan, self-insured health plan, and they have all the state-of-the-art ideas in these health plans on how to best manage your population health. And those CEOs of those organizations are responsible to each other for controlling their healthcare costs, because if they don't, they're going to be eyeball to eyeball with 4 other, 5 other, 10 other CEOs. They're going to say, you're not pulling your weight, you're costing us a lot of money, you got to do this. So there's opportunities for members of those workers' comp coalitions, and there are hundreds of companies of joining this and having CEO convince CEO that it's the right thing to do.
So is messenger as important or more important than message?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that, who you are is speaking so loud I can't hear what you're saying,
And Jamie, I see you bobbing your head up and down, and you had experience in your previous role with us, so talk about that, how, when you brought the right people in the room, the difference that it made.
It's just, I just think that you can't discount that enough. It's just, I'm just going to use myself as an example. I mean, I work for an enormous company and I manage a very large program, but I'm still very low on the totem pole. I can stand in front of many people and pitch an idea, but if I can get someone 2 ranks higher than me to believe in what I say and then have them deliver that message, it's just going to resound more with the group. And I think that's probably a horrible thing to say, but I mean, that's kind of how the world does work. And I think when we look back to my wellness council days, and I know Roxanne works really hard on this as well, but you get in with that kind of frontline staffer, you can convince them of all the best parts of what you're trying to do, but unless you can get that message up above, it's really hard to move it forward.
So we've got about 15, a little less than 15 minutes left. I was told to tell you to hold on, dinner's at 5:30, and we're going to chat here a little bit more, and then we'll take some questions. So let's take a few minutes out to talk now. We've talked about sort of from the HR manager level up. Now let's talk about messaging from the HR manager down. We've actually spent a lot of time at symposiums and so forth about messaging to employees and getting their engagement. And so I guess what I would say, obviously each one of these questions is a topic for a PhD thesis, but in each of your experiences, what have you found to be the most effective message looking down the organizational chart?
This is my favorite topic for sure, and anyone that worked with me when I worked with the Wellness Council of Maine has heard me say this, but you have to know your people. That's what it boils down to. You can take a cookie cutter program that's offered by some national organization and slap that out in front of people, but if you took the time to EMHS-itize it or Jackson Lab-itize it or wherever you work and talk in a language that resounds with your employees, I worked with a company once that was mostly men, and they tried really hard to get them to do a better job on their nutrition. And nothing was working until they started doing these special, they were man recipes. And it sounds silly, but during hunting season, they would do these healthy venison recipes. And here they were posting these up on the bulletin board and stacking them up so that as the people took them, they could really take account of how people were engaging with this particular bulletin board. And when they started actually talking to their population and not their wives at home, the guys loved it. They really got into it, and then they were able to build on that. So you just have to know who your people are. What is it that they want to hear, and how are they going to best get that message? I think it's so important, and I think we get so tied up in what we're supposed to do that we forget who we're talking to.
And I think, I think having really clear communication straight down the line is really important. I mean, you have to have buy-in from leadership. I mean, that's like one of the sort of 10 commandments, I guess, of wellness. And then you have to have buy-in down the line, and you have to have effective communication down the line, and accountability. So if you have different locations, say you have 10 different locations, and one of the supervisors at one of the locations doesn't believe in the message or doesn't communicate it effectively, you're not going to have good participation from the employees at that location. And so that's really important. But just as another CEO will listen to another CEO, a dishwasher or a flagger or somebody is going to listen to another flagger and believe them more than they're going to believe that the company's not trying to screw them over in some way or do something to them. And so I think having, making sure that you get effective communication down the line, but also making sure that you empower employees to feel good about the program and sort of brag about it and become champions for your program. That's absolutely important.
I remember one time we were trying to sell a wellness program to a company. It was fairly highly unionized. The head of the company just walked out one day and said, well, we're going to have a wellness program starting tomorrow. And the reaction was so negative that we never even got the thing off the ground. I mean, it's just absurd. You can't, the implementation and planning about getting the wellness program to people is absolutely critical. You have to have buy-in at all levels. And one of the most important levels, I hear about upper management until the cows come home, but one of the most important levels I hear about is, and I see about an experience, is the lower managerial level and the supervisor level. And what most of the coaching program, most programs we do are coaching programs, so we introduce it to the people first to let them know it's coming. But before that has even happened, all the managers at all the levels have actually been through the coaching process. Because the worst thing you can do is to have a worker walk up to any manager at any level and say, what's this wellness program that I hear is coming? And the guy goes, I don't know. And that's just like in work comp when you used to say, well, my hand hurts again, so you go report to your supervisor, and the supervisor goes, well, get your checkbook out, you're going to write the bill for that. So the same thing, that messages that get to people are critical, and if you haven't got control of them from the very beginning, you're not going to get the program implemented well. So people that matter to other people lead and follow those people. They do. If you ask them, if your supervisor works safely, will you work more safely? What's the answer to that? They always say yes. If your supervisor supports wellness, would you think more about wellness? The answer is yes, every time. So you have to get there ahead of time and get that done. I think that is absolutely critical.
From the beginning of the movement, we've always talked about financial incentives to the people up. But now, there's a lot of talk about financial incentives to the people down, right? How's that work?
It doesn't work if it feels like punishment.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important components of a wellness program is people have to feel safe. And as I said with Ben over there, for our program, he makes everybody feel safe. And they have to feel safe and feel trusted, because wellness is your health condition is a hugely personal thing. Everybody wants to be healthier, but there's a lot of fear. And if you think you're going to get your head chopped off, you're not going to trust people. You're going to pull back, And so, safety and trust is almost the first thing you have to have before you have anything else.
I think the financial incentives are really great for getting people in the door, but you have to really engage that person at that point, because a financial incentive only goes so far. I mean, if you give someone $100 to do the screening, and they do that for a couple of years, that doesn't seem like an extra $100 anymore. That just seems like the $100 they always get each year, and so it's not special. It's not like a feel-good thing anymore. And you can't keep upping your incentive, because that would just be crazy. You hit a point where you have to say that, that's what it is. But if, I think that if you're starting a program, it's a really great way to get people who are on the fence engaged. But then from that point on, you really need to, have a program that's meaningful to them and get them, and that empowers them to be engaged in their own well-being. And then that will be what keeps them in the program ultimately.
If eventually they don't recognize the benefit and the worthwhile energy that they're putting into it, then you really haven't succeeded.
I don't think that there's a trickier topic than incentivizing people to improve their health, and I think the biggest thing, if you are not currently offering incentives, I would not go into incentive plan without literally having a 5-year plan for what you're going to do. The other thing is so many companies, like the union company, or I think Dr. Catlett was referencing, they go from nothing to, all right, now everyone's going to have to take a screening in order to get into your medical plan. You have to ease people into the pool. So you start in the shallow end and you work your way up. I think you can make some really, really big mistakes by either starting too big too fast with your program design, and too big too fast with your incentives, because you've got to have something to build on. And I would caution anyone to really have a 5-year minimum plan in place if you want to embark on a significant incentive program. Even if it's not big money amounts, but if you're going to start incentivizing, you got to really think ahead.
Yeah, I think you have to remember that incentives themselves encourage participation, but they don't change behavior. So you've got to have some follow-up, or don't bother.
And it's not just a 5-year incentive plan, it's a 5-10-year culture shift.
Good point. So we've got a couple of minutes left, and I would open it up to some questions about how do we message up and down, and how do we tell people about this wonderful movement and what it can do for organizations and individuals.
I have a question about productivity. So it's tricky to measure. How do you go about doing it, and the impact that your wellness program is demonstrating for productivity?
Well, I actually used an article in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine that looked at about 770,000 people, validated the productivity scores that people got. They actually were looking for something else they weren't looking for. But one of the questions people ask, well, how do you know any of this healthcare stuff is related to productivity? Well, it turns out that about 26% of productivity can be directly related to having 8 different health risks. And so that's what they were able to do. So I use that model and tell people it's a model. It's still, be careful. You're not using their money. Most people don't measure productivity. We said if you measured it, and these people did it, it was validated in this very large study. And basically, if you are able to change these risks, and here's what's happened to those risks in your population, then you get this much credit for that. So I'd be happy to share that article with you sometime. It's quite a good study done a while back in the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine.
And there are organizations that are just set up to measure productivity. And that's kind of productivity is and I can't think of any ones that do that, but they have questionnaires that have been well validated, right, that they give employees to fill out. And employees are extremely honest about that. How much of your day are you, thinking about your bad finances? And they're able to really look at what employees are thinking and doing all day by the way they answer the questionnaires. And they're very non-threatening and well validated as measuring productivity.
The interesting thing is that the 2 strongest correlated risks, the heaviest weighted risks, are what? Depression and stress.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because if anyone has ever attended any talks about the whole brain drain and how we're really not meant to multitask, even though we're all doing that, you hear it from individuals themselves, not necessarily data, but those that meditate or just have a 5-minute brain drain break from their activities, they themselves recognize, oh my gosh, I am so much more productive in the afternoon now. I have more energy, I get more accomplished because I take a 20-minute nap every day.
Got time for a couple more? Or do you just want to eat?
Like, I mean, I do lots of promoting and marketing, and I think Justin hit it on the head where it's peer-to-peer mentoring. It's amazing what employees will do when they know it's safe because other employees have tried it. And you do need the top end so your manager's buy down. But I think as, you know, if you're a line worker, you know, if you're an employee, you're not the manager, you know, so I don't think, yes, you need the management, you know, buy-in to say, yes, you can participate in that, or yes, you can go to that, but when you get employee side by side by employee, and on the floor meeting when we do, you know, lunch and learns on like healthy grains, how many folks come and they have no clue what quinoa is, or I call it quinoa because it makes my wife mad. But you know, but when I say, you know, I'll push out like I mean, I've been in the lab long enough that I literally know almost everyone there, so I mean, I can push out emails afterwards, and you know, folks will say, you know, I've hated tofu all my life, but because you sent that email, I tried the recipe, it was great. You know, we've got some of the smartest people in the world who work at the Jackson Lab, and we had one researcher whose A1C was just through the roof, you know, just couldn't figure out how to manage it. We had another, you know, line worker who basically got the slap in the face, you know, really bad, but they got the hang of it. Over a year, they dropped like 111 pounds. And they said, you know, I know such and such is going through this and this and whatever, so I put that staff scientist with that, you know, one of our mechanics, and they sat down, and now to this day that the research scientist has his A1C where it should be. So it's really that peer-to-peer marketing.
Using
metric.
personal stories and sharing them with
That's true.
individuals, and having a varying level of management involved in the program and rotating it among departments and whatnot, I think also helps, because you always get new perspectives. It shares the responsibility, people don't get burnt out, you know, new ideas. And I would just also comment, not only do you want the management buy-in, but they really should be leading by example. You know, you can have a CEO sit there and say, yes, this is important, we want to do this, you know, with their little box of Dunkin' Donuts next to them, and it's really gonna be all for naught. You need them out there actively demonstrating that they do believe in what they're asking.
We will let the vision of Dunkin' Donuts be the last word before dinner. I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank all of you. I know it's been a long day. Thank you.